Well, good morning, grandchildren. It's your grandpa again, and time to read another couple of chapters in our storybook. We're reading Charlotte's Web, and I hope you're enjoying the storybook, and we'll get right into our story. A spider's web is stronger than it looks. Although it is made of very thin, delicate strands, the web is not easily broken. However, a web does get torn from every day by the insects that kick around in it, and a spider must rebuild it when it gets full of holes. Charlotte liked to do her weaving during the late afternoon, and Fern liked to sit nearby and watch. One afternoon she heard a most interesting conversation and witnessed a very strange event. "You have awfully hairy legs, Charlotte," said Wilbur, as the spider busily worked at her task. "My legs are hairy for good reason," replied Charlotte. "Furthermore, each leg of mine has 7 sections: the coxa, the trochanter, the femur, the patella, the tibia, and the metatarsus and the tarsus." Wilbur sat bolt upright. "You're kidding," he said. "No, I'm not either," said Charlotte. "Say those names again. I didn't catch them the first time." "Coxa, trochanter, femur, patella, tibia, metatarsus, and tarsus." "Goodness," said Wilbur, looking down at his own chubby legs. "I don't think my legs have 7 sections." "Well," said Charlotte, "you and I lead very different lives. You don't have to spin a web. That takes real leg work." "I could spin a web if I tried," said Wilbur, boasting. "I've just never tried." "Well, let's see you do it," said Charlotte. Fern chuckled softly. Her eyes grew wide with love for the pig. "Okay," said Wilbur. "You coach me and I'll spin one. It must be a lot of fun to spin a web. How do I start?" "Take a deep breath," said Charlotte, smiling. Wilbur breathed deeply. "Now climb to the highest place that you can get to, like this," and Charlotte raced up to the top of the doorway. Wilbur scrambled up to the top of the manure pile. "Very good," said Charlotte. "Now, make an attachment with your spinners. Hurl yourself into space. Let out a drag line as you go down." Wilbur hesitated just a moment, then jumped out into the air. He glanced hastily behind him to see if a piece of rope was following him to check his fall, but nothing seemed to be happening in his back end. And the next thing he knew, he landed with a thump. "Ugh," he grunted. Charlotte laughed so hard her web began to sway. "What did I do wrong?" asked the pig, when he recovered from his bump. "Nothing," said Charlotte. "It was a nice try." "I think I'll try again," said Wilbur cheerfully. "I believe that all I need is a piece of string to hold me." The pig walked out into his yard. "You there, Templeton," he called. The rat poked his head out from under the trough. "Got a piece of string I can borrow?" asked Wilbur. "I need to spin a web." Yes, indeed," said Templeton, who saved a string. "No trouble at all. Anything to oblige." He crept down into his hole, pushed the goose egg out of the way, and returned with an old piece of dirty white string. Wilbur examined it. "Just the thing," he said. "Tie one end to my tail, will you, Templeton?" Wilbur crouched low with his thin curly tail toward the rat. Templeton seized the string, passed it around the end of the pig's tail, and tied 2 half hitches. Charlotte watched in delight. Like Fern, she was truly fond of Wilbur, whose smelly pen and stale food attracted many of the flies that she needed, and she was proud to see that he was not a quitter. He was willing to try again to spin the web. Here's a picture of the rat tying the string onto the pig's tail, and the pig jumping into the air. While the rat and the spider and the little girl watched, Wilbur climbed again to the top of the manure pile, full of energy and hope. "Everybody watch," he said, and summoning all his strength, he threw himself into the air as far as he could, head first. The string trailed behind him, but he had neglected to fasten the other end to anything, and it didn't really do any good anyway, and Wilbur landed with a thud, crashed and hurt. Tears came to his eyes. Templeton grinned. Charlotte just sat quietly. After a bit, she spoke. "You can't spin a web, Wilbur. I'd advise you to just put the idea out of your mind. You lack 2 things that are needed for spinning a web." "Well, what are they?" asked Wilbur sadly. "Well, you lack a set of spinners, and you lack the know-how. But cheer up. You don't need a web. Zuckerman supplies you with 3 big meals a day. Why should you worry about trapping your own food?" Wilbur sighed. You are ever so much more clever and brighter than I am, Charlotte. I guess I was just trying to show off. It serves me right. Templeton untied the string and took it back into his home. Charlotte returned to her web weaving. You needn't feel too badly, Wilbur, she said. Not many creatures can spin webs. Even men aren't as good at it as spiders are, although they think they are pretty good, and they'll try anything. Did you ever hear of the Queensboro Bridge? Wilbur shook his head. Is it a web? Well, sort of, said Charlotte. But do you know how long it took them to build it? 8 whole years. My goodness, I would have starved to death waiting that long. I can make a web in a single evening. What do people catch on the Queensboro Bridge? Bugs? Asked Wilbur. No, said Charlotte, they don't catch anything. They just keep on running, trotting back and forth, back and forth, back and forth across the bridge, hoping that there's something better on the other side. If they'd hang head down from the top of the thing and wait quietly, maybe something good would come along. But no, with men it's always rush, 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 every minute. And I'm glad I'm a sedentary spider. What does sedentary mean? Asked Wilbur. Well, it means I sit a good part of the time and I don't go wandering off all over creation. I know a good thing when I see it, and my web is a good thing. I stay put and wait for what comes. Gives me a chance to think. Well, I'm sort of sedentary, myself, I guess, said the pig. I have to hang around here whether I want to or not. You know where I'd really like to be this evening? Where? Said Charlotte. In a forest, looking for beechnuts and truffles and delectable roots, and pushing leaves aside with my wonderfully strong nose, and searching and sniffing all along the ground, smelling, smelling, smelling. You smell just the way you are, remarked a lamb who had just walked in. I can smell you from here. You're the smelliest creature in the place. Wilbur hung his head. His eyes grew wet with tears. Charlotte noticed his embarrassment, and she spoke sharply to the lamb. Let Wilbur alone, she said. He has a perfect right to smell, considering his surroundings. You're no bundle of sweet peas yourself. Furthermore, you're interrupting a very pleasant conversation. Now, what were we talking about, Wilbur, when we were so rudely interrupted? Oh, I don't remember, said Wilbur. It doesn't really make any difference. Let's not talk any more for a while, Charlotte. I'm getting sleepy. Will you go ahead and finish fixing your web, and I'll just lie here and watch you. It's a lovely evening. Wilbur stretched out on his side. Twilight settled over the Zuckerman farm, and a feeling of peace. Firm knew it was almost supper time, but she couldn't bear to leave. Swallows passed on silent wings in and out of the doorways, bringing food to their young ones. From across the road, a bird sang, "Whippoorwill, whippoorwill, whippoorwill, whippoorwill." And Luby sat down under the apple tree and lit his pipe. The animal sniffed the familiar smell of strong tobacco smoke, and Wilbur heard the trill of the tree frog and the occasional slamming of the kitchen door. All these sounds made him feel comfortable and happy, for he loved life and he loved to be a part of the world in the summer evening. But as he lay there, he remembered what the old sheep had told him. The thought of death came to him, and he began to tremble with fear. Charlotte, he said softly. Yes, Wilbur. I don't want to die. Of course you don't, said Charlotte, in a comforting voice. I love it here in the barn, said Wilbur. I love everything about this place. Well, of course you do, said Charlotte. We all do. The goose appeared, followed by her 7 goslings, and they thrust their little necks out and kept a musical whistling going, like a tiny troop of pipers. Wilbur listened to the sound with love in his heart. Charlotte, he said again. Yes, said the spider. Were you serious when you promised you would keep them from killing me? I was never more serious in my life, and I'm not going to let you die, Wilbur. Well, how are you going to save me? Asked Wilbur, whose curiosity was now very strong on this point. Well, said Charlotte vaguely, I don't really know, but I'm working on a plan. That's wonderful, said Wilbur. How's the plan coming, Charlotte? Have you got very far with it? Is it coming along very well? Wilbur was trembling again, but Charlotte was cool and collected. Oh, it's coming along all right. It's coming along fine, she said, lightly. The plan is still in its early stages and hasn't completely shaped up yet, but I am working on it. When do you work on it? Asked Wilbur. When I'm hanging head down at the top of my web. That's when I do my best thinking, because all the blood is in my head. I'd be only too glad to help in any way that I can. Oh, I'll work it out alone, said Charlotte. I can think better if I think alone. Well, all right, said Wilbur, but don't fail to let me know if there's anything I can do to help, no matter how slight. Well, replied Charlotte, you must try to build yourself up. I want you to get plenty of sleep and stop worrying. Never hurry, never worry. Chew your food thoroughly. Eat every bit of it, except you must leave just enough for Templeton. Gain some weight and stay well. That's the way you can help. Keep fit and don't lose your nerve. Do you think you understand? Yes, I understand, said Wilbur. Go along to bed then, said Charlotte. Sleep is also important. Wilbur trotted over to the darkest corner of his pen and threw himself down. He closed his eyes, but a minute later he spoke. Charlotte, he said. Yes, Wilbur. May I go out through my trough and see if I left any of my supper? I think I may have left just a tiny bit of mashed potatoes. Very well, said Charlotte, but I want you in bed again without delay. Wilbur started to race out to his yard. Slowly, said Charlotte. Never hurry, never worry. Wilbur checked himself and crept out slowly to his trough. He found a bit of potato, chewed it carefully, swallowed it, and walked back to bed. He closed his eyes and was silent for a while. Charlotte, he said in a whisper. Yes, said Charlotte. May I get a drink of milk? I think there are a few drops of milk left in my trough. No, she said. The trough is dry. And I want you to get some sleep. No more talking. Close your eyes. Go to sleep. Wilbur shut his eyes. Fern got up from her stool and started for home. Her mind was full of everything she had seen and heard. Good night, Charlotte, said Wilbur. Good night, Wilbur, said Charlotte. There was a pause. Good night, Charlotte. Good night, Wilbur. Good night, good night, good night, good night. Day after day, the spider waited. She hung head down for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour, she sat motionless, deep in thought. Having promised Wilbur that she would save his life, she was now determined to keep her promise. Charlotte was naturally a very patient person, but she knew from experience that if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web. And she felt sure that if she waited long enough now, that a thought would come about Wilbur's problem. An idea would come to her mind. Finally, one morning toward the middle of July, an idea came. Why, how perfectly simple, she said to herself. The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on Zuckerman. If I can fool a bug, I can fool, thought Charlotte, I can surely fool a man. People are not as smart as bugs. Wilbur walked into his yard just at that moment. What are you thinking about, Charlotte? He asked. I was just thinking, said the spider, that people are very gullible. Gullible? Well, what does gullible mean? Asked Wilbur. Easy to fool, said Charlotte. That's a mercy, replied Wilbur, and he lay down in the shade of his fence and went fast asleep. The spider, however, stayed wide awake, gazing affectionately at him and making plans for his future. Summer was half gone, and she knew she didn't have much time. That morning, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery Arable wandered into the Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery carried a live frog in his hand. Fern had a crown of daisies in her hair. The children ran straight for the kitchen. Just in time for a piece of blueberry pie, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Look at my frog, said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board and holding out his hand for a pie. Take that thing out of here, said Mrs. Zuckerman. He's hot, said Fern. He's almost dead, that frog. He's not, said Avery. He lets me scratch him behind the eyes. The frog jumped and landed right in Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. You're getting pie on yourself, said Fern. Can I look for eggs at the hen house, Aunt Edith? Run outdoors, both of you, and don't bother the hens. It's getting all over everything, shouted Fern. His pie is all over his front. Come on, frog, said Avery. He scooped up his frog. The frog kicked, splashing soapy water now onto the blueberry pie. Another crisis, groaned Fern. Let's swing in the swing, said Avery, and the children ran to the barn. Mrs. Zuckerman was thoroughly disgusted. Mr. Zuckerman had the best swing in the whole country. It was a single long piece of heavy rope tied to the beam over the north doorway. At the bottom end of the rope was a fat knot to sit on, and it was arranged so that you could swing without being pushed. You climbed a ladder to the hayloft, then holding on to the rope, you would stand on the edge and look down. You were scared and you were dizzy. Then you straddled the knot so that it acted as a seat, and you got up all your nerve, took a deep breath, and jumped. For a second you would seem to be falling to the barn floor far below, but then suddenly the rope would begin to catch you, and you would sail through the barn door about a mile a minute, with the wind whistling in your eyes and your ears and your hair, and then you would zoom upward into the sky and look at the clouds, and the rope would twist, and you would twist and turn with the rope, and then you would drop back down, 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 down out of the sky and come sailing back into the barn, almost into the hayloft, and then sail back out again, but not quite as far this time, and then sail back in again, not quite so high this time, and then sail back out again, and then back in, and then out, and then in, and then you jump off and you fall down and let somebody else try. Mothers for miles around worried about Zuckerman's swing. They feared some child would fall off one day, but no child ever did. Children almost always hang on to things a lot tighter than their parents think they will. Avery put the frog in his pocket and climbed to the hayloft. The last time I swing on this swing, I almost crashed into a barn swallow, he yelled. Take that frog out of your pocket, ordered Fern. Avery straddled the rope and jumped. He sailed out through the door, frog and all. Into the sky, the frog and all. And then he sailed back into the barn. Your tongue is purple, screamed Fern. So is yours, cried Avery, sailing back out again with the frog. I have hay inside my dress and it itches, called Fern. Scratch it, yelled Avery as he sailed back in. It's my turn, said Fern. Jump off. Fern's got the itch, sang Avery. When he finally jumped off, he threw the swing up to his sister. She shut her eyes tight and jumped. She felt the dizzy drop and then the supporting lift of the swing, and when she opened her eyes, she was looking up into the blue sky. It was about to fly back through the door. They took turns for about an hour. Here's a picture of the swing. Zuckerman's barn swing. Rope tied onto the beam at the top. When the children finally grew tired of swinging, they went down toward the pasture and picked some wild raspberries and ate them. Their tongues turned from purple to red. Fern bit into a raspberry that had a bad-tasting bug inside of it and got discouraged. Avery found an empty candy box to put his frog in, and the frog seemed tired after this morning in the swing. The children walked slowly toward the barn. They too were tired and hardly had energy enough to walk. Let's build a tree house, suggested Avery. I want to live in a tree with my frog. I'm going to visit Wilbur, Fern said. They climbed the fence into the lane and walked toward the pig pen. Wilbur heard them coming and got up. Avery noticed the spider web, and coming closer, he saw Charlotte. Hey, look at that big spider, he said. It's tremendous. Leave it alone, commanded Fern. You've got a frog, isn't that enough? That's a fine spider. I'm going to capture it, said Avery. He took the cover off the candy box, and then he picked up a stick. I'm going to knock that old spider into this box, he said. Wilbur's heart almost stopped when he saw what was going on. This might be the end of Charlotte if the boy succeeded in catching her. You stop it, Avery, cried Fern. Avery put one leg over the fence of the pig pen. He was just about to raise his stick to hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed on the edge of Wilbur's trough. The trough tipped up, and then down it came with a slap. The goose egg was right underneath of it. There was a dull explosion, and the egg broke. And then a horrible smell. Fern screamed. Avery jumped to his feet. The air was filled with a terrible gaseous smells from the rotten egg. Templeton, who had been resting in his home, scuttled away into the barn. Good night, screamed Avery. Good night. What a stink. Let's get out of here. Fern was crying. She held her nose and ran towards the house. Avery ran after her, holding his nose, and Charlotte felt greatly relieved to see them go. It had been a narrow escape. Later on that morning, the animals came up from the pasture, the sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, and the 7 goslings. There were many complaints about the awful smell. Here's a picture of the boy upside down on the trough and breaking the egg. Wilbur had to tell the story over and over again of how the arable boy had tried to capture Charlotte, and how the smell of the broken egg drove him away just in time. It was that rotten goose egg that saved Charlotte's life, said Wilbur. The goose was proud to have her share in the endeavor. I'm delighted that the egg never hatched, she gobbled. Templeton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg. He couldn't resist boasting. It pays to save things, he said in his surly voice. A rat never knows when something's going to come in handy, and I never throw anything away. Well, said one of the lambs, this whole business is all well and good for Charlotte, but what about the rest of us? This smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn that's perfumed with rotten egg smell? Don't worry, you'll get used to it, said Templeton. He sat up and pulled wisely on his whiskers, then crept away to pay a visit to the dump. When Louvie showed up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food for Wilbur, he stopped short of a few paces from the pig pen. He sniffed the air and made a face. What in thunder is that? He said, setting the pail down. He picked up a stick that Avery had dropped and pried the trough up. Oh, rats, he said, rats. Phew, I might have known a rat would make a nest under this trough. I hate a rat. And Louvie dragged Wilbur's trough across the yard and kicked some dirt into the rat's nest, burying the rotten egg and all Templeton's other possessions. Then he picked up the pail. Wilbur stood in the trough, drooling with hunger. Louvie poured the slops, and the slops ran creamily down around the pig's eyes and ears. Wilbur grunted, and he gulped, and he sucked, and he sucked, and he gulped, and he making a swishing and swooshing noises, anxious to get everything all at once. It was a delicious meal. Skim milk, wheat middlings, leftover pancakes, half a donut, a rind of summer squash, 2 pieces of stale toast, a third of a ginger snap, a fishtail, 1 orange peel, several noodles from the noodle soup, scum off the cup of cocoa, and an ancient jelly roll, and a strip of paper from the lining of the garbage pail, and a spoonful of raspberry jello. Wilbur ate heartily. He planned to leave half a noodle and a few drops of milk for Templeton. Then he remembered that the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life, and that Charlotte was trying to save his life, so, well, he left a whole noodle instead of just a half. Now that the broken egg was buried, the air cleared, and the barn smelled good again. The afternoon passed, and evening came. Shadows lengthened. The cool, kindly breath of evening finally entered through the doors and the windows. Astride her web, Charlotte sat moodily eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. And after a while, she bestirred herself, and she descended to the center of the web, and there she began to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly but steadily while the other creatures dozed. None of the others, not even the goose, noticed that she was busy at work. Deep in his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed. Over in their favorite corner, the gosling whistled a night song. Charlotte tore quite a section out of her web, leaving an open space in the middle. Then she started weaving something to take the place of the threads that she had removed. When Templeton got back from the dump around midnight, the spider was still at work. Charlotte's weaving something in her web and working hard on an idea to save Wilbur's life. Well, I've enjoyed reading a book to you. I hope you kids are enjoying it and get to hear a little bit of Grandpa. And we love you, and hopefully we'll get to see you in a month or so. I think they're going to lift some of the restrictions that we're under, and we'll get to see each other again. I love you very much, kids. Bye.